It wasn't that long ago that, as Star Wars adult fans, we were being treated to pretty much the quintessential best 3 3/4 figures that Hasbro, Kenner slash Hasbro has put out. We were getting main characters in all sorts of variants that if you blink, you miss them in the movies. We were getting variants of characters from the holiday special, which is probably one of the biggest black sheep of the entire Star Wars franchise. So, what changed? Why is it that this huge plethora of characters and background aliens and unnamed characters, but we know who they are because, we've read all of the books and the decipher cards. I mean, we were getting cantina aliens that were fully tooled and characters that were literally running in the background. But the last time that we got a fully tooled cantina alien was 2015. And it's now 2021. It's May 2021. So when I'm recording this video, but YouTube lives forever. I mean, the latest reveals from Hasbro for the 3 3/4 series, which is now called the Vintage Collection, are basically repaints. They're figures that we've gotten before, but they've got a spruced up paint job, and they're on a vintage card. Some of them have some new parts. I mean, this Tusken Raider has, I think, new arms so that he can actually articulate correctly, which I love Tusken Raiders, so I'll be getting this. So we have to go back to the beginning. Back when Star Wars first came out in 1977, and there were lines all the way around the block. What changed between then and now that Star Wars is no longer sort of king of the toy aisle as it once was, and even once was again when the Power of the Force 2 series came out? So obviously, Star Wars was breakthrough. Before Star Wars, science fiction movies were, well, they weren't exactly things that people were rushing out to license. Yes, there were Planet of the Apes toys, but it was really seen as a one and done thing. Star Wars changed everything. So why is it that now there can't seem to be a hit? Why everything keeps missing the target? I mean, obviously Baby Yoda has his own cereal, but as an overall brand. Now, this isn't the first time this has happened in modern times. If you remember at the very end of Power of the Force 2, before Episode 1 came out, those last few waves were, for the most part, delisted at retail. They weren't being ordered. I mean, notoriously, the R2 with Leia hologram was one of the hardest figures to find. And then, of course, Episode 1 came out, and while it had its good parts and its bad parts, it did sell a lot of toys. And that's really what retail cares about, is how many toys it sells. In fact, this goodwill led to Attack of the Clones getting an entire aisle at Target. I don't know if you remember, but I definitely recall going to Target, and there was literally a full 10 feet of basic figures, just this sea of blue. I've never seen so many Star Wars figures on sale at once, at least new figures. It was unbelievable. This was like the largest square footage planogram. So while we've had many eras of Star Wars over the years, some doing better than others, we're definitely back to a time kind of right before the prequels. And obviously, there were definite parts of the prequels that were sort of, bigger with the mass public and with fans. I mean, Revenge of the Sith is considered probably the best of them. But when you look at the new Disney movies, that's where you definitely start to see a decline. And not just in what fans think of the movies, but more importantly, what kids and retail think of the brand. And a lot of kids have moved on. The Marvel Universe is huge with kids, especially from a toy, lunchbox, Halloween costume, and t-shirt perspective. Looking at all of the Star Wars movies since 1977, adjusted for inflation, as this chart shows, you can see that the latest movies have been on the decline. And not, I would say more importantly, but a factor that's bigger for retail is the fact that all of the toys since Episode 7 have consistently been poorer sellers compared to previous lines like the prequel movies and even the Clone Wars, which did very well from a toy perspective. So it's kind of one of those things, okay, we can accept, one bump in the road, but there's been, 4 or 5 Even, the collector figures and customized items are not selling through and wind up on clearance. And this is a big deal for retail because retail doesn't just blindly trust a brand. They want to see results. And that's why with Rise of Skywalker, you saw a completely new scale put out for the main line, for really the kids, but collectors too, but kids being the main purchaser. So these were 5-inch figures that had a friendlier animated look. And this was the main line for the movie. And there weren't that many SKUs. And it also didn't really do fantastic at retail. In fact, it's already gone away. So it's kind of that old, phrase, fool me once, strike one. Fool me twice, strike three. And that's how retail tends to look at the brand at the moment because it's consistently not delivered. They can take, a bump in the road, one line or one movie not doing well. But when you have movie after movie after movie, which is sold in as being huge, that becomes a problem for retail. Obviously, one of the reasons the new films have not done so well is the story hasn't followed this sort of hero's journey, where you follow one character who goes from being a farmer to being a knight apprentice to being a full knight. You have a clear story there, and that hasn't been as clear in the new movies. Now, this Lego Luke actually leads to the other issue with the Star Wars toys in general. So, in 1977, there was really only one way to enjoy Star Wars toys. You had the Kenner figures. And while there were more than just figures put out, there were other SKUs and other assortments, everything from bop bags to miniature vehicles. It was the figures that were the main bread and butter, and the vehicles that went with the figures, because it was actually a vehicle line. The figures were meant to be the accessories to the vehicles. Nowadays, you fast forward, and you can get figures in the same scale in any number of ways. In fact, you can get figures that are 6-inch, but are based to look like the 3 3/4 figures from 1978, which is kind of fun, interesting, but again, just look at how many options you have of getting the same character. I mean, with Greedo, you could get a super deformed Greedo from Funko in plastic, or you could also get a super deformed Greedo that is made of cloth. So it sort of begs the question of how many different Greedos, and I'm just using Greedo as a metaphor for all of the Star Wars figures. I like to pick on Greedo because I love Greedo. Obviously, a Pez dispenser has a different play pattern than an action figure, but all of this leads to a dilution of the characters and the brand in general. So going back to my point about Lego Luke from a few moments ago, Lego Star Wars 20 years ago really did change the roadmap. When Lego got the Star Wars license, and this is a different play pattern, this is called construction, so it's not action figures, which is why it was carved out, and Hasbro it didn't overlap with what Hasbro was doing. Even though it has minifigures, the figures are considered part of construction play. It's not figure-based. And, I love Lego, and I love Star Wars. It makes sense. It's peanut butter and chocolate, Reese's all over again. But what this did is it affected what's called the wallet application rule, which essentially, it's a marketing term, but it breaks down what's called share of wallet. So let's say you're a Star Wars fan and you have $100. Well, back in the day, you spent all $100 on Kenner toys. Now, today, you could buy Lego or Funko or Pez. There's so many different options in order for you to enjoy Star Wars as a brand that it tends to dilute the brand as a whole. And too many choices can also confuse customers, especially parents and gift givers, who are by far the biggest purchasers of Star Wars product, while we may have a high emotional connection to it. So, if you look back at the 80s when Kenner introduced its second scale, the micro collection, this was the first time they ever did a new scale back in the original line, the vintage days, whatever you want to call it. Well, parents rejected this because they said, look, I already invested in the Millennium Falcon at 3 3/4. I'm not going to buy my kid an entirely new scale of Star Wars figures, which is what obviously Kenner wanted. They wanted to increase sales by introducing a new scale with these little non-articulated metal figures and play sets. Plus, it allowed play sets that you couldn't do in 3 3/4.
I don't think so, Tim.
And that was kind of what it was. Parents said no, yet today, no one's really learned that lesson or really remembered that lesson, and we continue to get even the latest content, Mandalorian, in every possible scale and style there is. And, while I love The Mandalorian and kids do too, for retail, because of the consistent poor performance of the last few movies, and I'm talking 5 movies, retail trust is down, but bigger, kids are less interested. Yeah, The Mandalorian is awesome and everyone loves Baby Yoda, but the movies for the past, 10 years have underperformed. And, even Disney obviously knows this, and this is a lot because of Disney Plus. They can now track what you watch to the minute, and they know which Star Wars movies you're watching. So I saw this pop up on my feed. It was a Star Wars calendar. And if you look at it, every single character is from the original trilogy. There's not even a prequel character in this. And that's because they know from Disney Plus this is what people are watching. So can Star Wars be strong again? It's going to always be there, like, the Beatles or Elvis or, some of those brands just never go away. But if this generation is not embracing it the way we did, it's, gone. It goes back to being skinny Luke. I mean, I'm using, the buff Luke from Power of the Force 2 as a bad example, but you get what I mean. I'm going to buy this new Tusken Raider. I can't wait to get it. I'm a completist. I'm all in. But really the question is, how many people like me or like you watching this are there? Are there enough adult collector fans to justify fully tooled 3 3/4 figures? And that's really the question at the bottom of everything, that there needs to be a consistent growing base of kids coming in to replace collectors, and whether or not we're seeing that is really the big issue. Are there enough adult fans to keep it going? That remains to be seen. I hope you enjoyed this video and it clarified kind of what is going on in the aisle. If you like this video, please do share it and give it a like. It tells YouTube to share it with more people. It's how their algorithm works. Thanks for watching.